Okay, so today I'm going to be going through poetry. We're going to do a little bit of this in class, but it's actually quite intricate, so I thought a video would be appropriate. Just to let you know, poetry is a major part of the reading benchmarks for K to 5, especially in craft and structure. Anything from identifying words or phrases through metaphor and simile, understanding how alliteration rhymes, work in a poem to convey meaning. That's grade. Then grade 3. Again, it's about the idea of non-literal language, understanding figurative language, using the appropriate literary vocabulary when referring to poems, determining the theme of a poem from details in the text, so text analysis, that's grade 4, and explaining the major differences between poems and other genres, and being able to refer to the structural elements such as verse, rhythm, meter. Grade 5, you have determining the meaning of the words and phrases through metaphor, explaining the structural elements of a particular poem. So it's all through K to 5, which is why we're going to pay some time on it. Why poetry? Paying attention to words. A poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom. Understand how language works, reading around to hear and revel in language, and choral reading to improve fluency. So poetry is very popular all through elementary school because it is a way to encourage people to think, or students to think in abstraction in order to figure out figurative language. And when you are good at figuring out figurative language within context, you tend to pick up cues of how to decode the interpretation of words in general, because in a wider sense, all texts are written in a kind of poetic form, not literally poetry, but in text, words are very purposely chosen, and that's the whole idea between poetry, is that it's about picking the right words, and we'll go. Choral poetry is particularly important, and if you look at the benchmark in the kindergarten grades, one is to encourage activities of group reading, and choral poetry is a major part of that. And it's when, as a group, they perform a poem. So it's encouraging fluency of reading. So with poetry, poetic language is innovative and surprising, careful word choices, sounds are combined in ways that make words sing, and there's an engagement of content. So it's very much about how the words are being heard. A very long time ago, before literacy was widespread, poetry was something that was orally conveyed. So in many forms of poetry, it matters more about how it sounds more than how it looks. Of course, we'll move into other visual poetry where that's the opposite, but it's something to do in mind. Poetry, abstract, unique, concrete. 5 fundamental qualities of poetry: utilizing the line as a primary unit rather than the sentence. Poets outline their text on the page in a certain way to convey meaning, and it's not always incomplete sentences, as we will see. It's a heightened senses of images. It should convey meaning that no other literary form can really convey, and we'll see that with some examples. Greater attention to the sound of the words, development of rhythm, creating density by implying far more than stated directly. So there's also implicit and explicit meaning, which we will get into. Checklists for evaluating poetry: purposeful form and sound elements, rhyme, rhythm, repetition, words, lines, stanzas, convey meaning about the subject or mood, engaging subjects to intended readers, verbal and emotional intelligence. Anthologies are inclusive, purposeful, and logical. And now we're going to get into the elements: wordplay, outrageous situations, unexpected viewpoints, sensory imagery, figurative language, commonplace experiences become extraordinary. And these are various ways that poems become attractive to young readers, and we'll look more intensely at them. So first, the biggest difference between simile and metaphor. you're they both are comparing one thing to another. But simile is explicit, using like or as, and metaphor is implicit. So morning is a new sheet of paper. It's a metaphor because like and as is not used. If it said morning is like a new sheet of paper, then that would be a simile because it's explicit. And this is important, and it's important in many of the core standards. So simile and metaphor are important to distinguish from one another. Poetic techniques. Repetition of consonants. Lickety, pickety, rickety. Repetition is important. You'll see it a lot. If you think of songwriting, when there's a refrain, it's something that you remember in your head over and over again. It's the chorus of the song. Personification, representing a thing or abstraction as a person. Rising like a fresh loaf, sun rises, tempting dawn to break her golden crust, tastes morning. So the sun is being personified and made a her golden crust. That's personification. Alliteration, repetition of initial consonant sounds at close intervals. This can get tricky. Acinus and alliteration are very tricky things to remember. Alliteration is the repetition of consonants. Timothy Tompkins had turnips and tea. So that repetition of the T is important. The turnips were tiny. He ate at least 3. Often tongue twisters, alliteration is used. In comparison, then there's assonance, repetition of vowel sounds at close intervals. Susie's galoshes make splishes and splashes and splashes and sloshes as Susie steps slowly along in the slush. So you're hearing splashes, sloshes, slooshes, splishes. It's the at close intervals, it's the vowel sound. And if you're having trouble, like a tongue twister trouble, you know it's either alliteration or assonance. It's either one, and it's based on whether it's a vowel or it's a consonant. The next thing we have is onomatopoeia. And it's words created from natural sounds associated with the thing or actions, splishes and splashes and slush. So that's referring to someone playing in the slush in the snow, and it's supposed to be what they're hearing. Or yow! It's words that are appearing that are supposed to mimic what is heard in the real world. For instance, in America, we will say bark, bark for what a dog actually, what we think we hear from a dog. In a different language, actually, they don't say bark, bark. They say it, I wish I had an example, but I don't have one. They say other things to connote what sound the dog is making. Or the fact that, we say that ducks quack. Quack, it's onomatopoeia. It's important to keep this in mind. Rhythms, very important to poetry. Just like in songs, rhythm is essential. It's a recurrence of specific beats of stressed and unstressed syllables. Over and over, the tumblers tumble, with never a fumble, with never a stumble. You can even kind of hear in when you say it, that it has this musical kind of cadence. Then we have different kinds of rhyme, and we have end rhyme, the last word of the line rhymes. And this is a poem from Emily Dickinson. Life is but life, and death but death. Bliss is but bliss, and breath but breath. And if indeed I fail, at least to know the worst is sweet. Defeat means nothing but defeat. No dearer can prevail. So as you can see, death and breath, they rhyme. So you would put an A next to them. Then you have sweet and defeat. They rhyme. So, and then you have fail and prevail. So it would actually read, the rhyme scheme would be A, A, B, C, C, B, if we were doing a rhyme scheme. So run over rhyme. The last word of one line rhymes with the first word of the next line. Who am I now? How am I to be? Looking behind to find the future me. So who am I now? Now rhymes with how. Behind, to find. So run over rhyme is when the rhyme, it's not end rhyme, but it's when the last word of the line rhymes with the first word of the next line. Something we're not going to focus on a lot is meter, but it's important to keep in mind because it is in the core standards for 5th grade. because apparently in intermediate school we're supposed to be learning Shakespeare in an iambic pentameter. But it's how language is stressed. And if you remember, from high school, when you're looking at poems, the unstressed stressed. So let me try to do it the way this is outlined here. So long as men our breath or eyes can see, so long lives this, and the gives life to thee. That was horrible, but that's a sonnet, and sonnets has a particular meter. So it's just important to keep in mind because of free verse, which doesn't have meter. It doesn't abide by adhering to predetermined rules, like certain rhyme schemes or certain meter schemes. It is completely free of that, but it's still a poetic form due to the way it uses stanzas, the way it uses condensed language, and we'll see some examples of that. But we're going to look at more forms of the ballad. Traditionally, a ballad contains 4 lines, each with 8 syllables, and with the second and fourth lines rhyming. And it usually tells a story in verse, often sung. So, as we can see here, but mother, I won't be alone, other children will go with me, and march the streets of Birmingham to make our country free. So, you can see here the second and the fourth line rhyme, end rhyme. And we have the syllables, there's 4 lines, each with 8 syllables. So, ballads, you don't see a lot of them in children's literature, but they do occur. Lyric poetry, a statement of mood or feeling. Lyric poetry typically describes the poet's innermost feelings or candid observation, evokes a musical quality in its sounds and rhythms. This is Percy Shelley. It's called Lament. Percy Shelley was actually married to Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. He's known as one of the utmost romantic poets. And who's friends with Lord Byron. Great poet. But let's read the poem, Lyric Poetry. O world, O life, O time, O whose last steps I climb, trembling at where I had stood before, when will return the glory of our prime? No more, O nevermore. Out of the day and night, a joy has taken flight. Fresh spring and summer and winter hour. Move my faint heart with grief, but with delight. No more, oh nevermore. I mean, you can just tell the guy's really intense by the amount of times he says "oh," but it's conveying something lyrical, something that you can't convey any other way, and it's really something that needs to be unpacked. And he uses rhyme. You don't need to use rhyme in lyric poetry, but Percy Shelley is known for using rhyme very systematically to convey meaning. Lyric poetry. Narrative poetry. Verse that tells a story. Can be long or short, can be simple or complex. And narrative poetry dates back centuries to the Iliad and the Odyssey. And narrative poetry we can see best in what we're reading in terms of we're reading verse novels. Verse novels use narrative poetry to tell a story. Concrete to suggest or illustrate the meaning. So we have an apple, and it says apple, 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 and we have a little boy that's made out of a poem. Blue Lipstick's a really good concrete poem anthology, but a lot of people also call this shape poems. So then we have haiku. There are a lot of books that use haiku, and haiku is taught at a very young age because it's a really simple way to teach how syllables work, because it's 5, 7, 5. So let's look at the haiku. Forever waiting, the empty food. Well, where's my dinner? So you can kind of count it, forever waiting, the empty food bowl taunts me. Where's my dinner? So Many people use different ways of counting the syllables of a text, but that's one way. But you just have to remember, it's 575. Usually, traditionally, it's from Japan, and it's usually supposed to be about nature, but it's, as it was used here, is used for a variety of reasons. Another form of poetry is riddle poems. So I have an example here. It's right behind you, creeps on the ground, follows you home, does not make a sound. Better turn around, and it's the shadow. So that's a riddle poem's also a form. And actually, you see riddle poems a lot in single poetry books. Then we have limericks. It's 5 lines, and the rhyme scheme is A, A, B, B, A. And here we have a limerick example. There once was a girl with one eye. They stared at her when she walked by. They think it's such a fright that she has half their sight, but she has half the tears to cry. So you see the rhyme scheme is AA, I and by rhyme, fright and sight rhyme, and then cry rhymes with the ones above. So, and it's 5 lines long. So that's a limerick. And these are all various forms, and it's hard to keep them all apart. But eventually, you need to have that vocabulary to be able to teach it, or to even know that there are differences. So novels in verse. This is something to keep in mind in general. A novel in verse, it's poetry, but it can be a multiple of genres. For instance, Locomotion, which some of you read, is contemporary realistic fiction. But we also have books like Out of the Dust and The Surrender Tree, which are historical fiction. So just like graphic novels, it's a format, and it can come in a variety and convey a variety of times, places, fantasy. It's really what is the content of the book. And the poetry is more of the vehicle to convey it. Poetry anthologies. There's specialized anthologies, and specialized anthologies it could be a whole anthology about dogs, and it could be written by a variety of authors. Or it could be a specialized author anthology, where it's just one author's work, like Shel Silverstein, on a variety of topics. There's generalized collective anthologies, which means it could just be a book of good poems for children, and that would be on a variety of topics with a variety of authors. A poem could be conveyed in a single picture book, meaning that one picture book is using one poem throughout the whole picture book. And then there's novels in verse. And there's a variety of poetry for awards, and these are some of the most well-known poets. Nikki Grimes has a lot of books that are out there. Eve Merriam, David McCord. And getting to know the authors is one way to be able to pick out the. Teaching poetry throughout the year, interspersed in other units, allows students to dip in and out of poetry. Kids are taught to be afraid and or to dislike poetry. Poetry has become a way to teach across the curriculum. Like I said, poetry is a vehicle or a format, but there are a lot of nonfiction poetry books about the environment, or about dogs or various kinds of animals. So it's something that can go all around the curriculum, and they're starting younger and younger because we need to get rid of the fear of poetry, that we can't understand poetry. It's actually quite accessible if you learn to play with language and to enjoy playing with language, which is, with all the varieties out there, there's a way to make it fun. And whether you're a visual learner, you could use concrete poetry, or you're someone who learns better by sound, you use lyric poetry with rhythm. There's a variety of ways to put it in the curriculum and meet the core standards.